All right, welcome everyone. Yeah, my name's Nate, and thank you for coming for the Scientist Rebellion talk. Today we have two speakers from Scientist Rebellion United States. We have Peter Kalmus, who's a climate scientist and activist based in Los Angeles, and he's been outspoken on the need for direct action in the fight to save what can still be saved. And also we have William Livernois, I hope I said that correct, and he's a PhD candidate at the University of Washington, researching biomaterials for electronics. He's organized with XR, Extinction Rebellion chapters in Boston and in Seattle, as well as other environmental groups since 2019, leading actions and risking arrest to draw attention to our climate and ecological crisis and encourage others to take action for life on this planet. So thank you both very much for giving this talk today, and I will turn it over to Peter.
Okay, thank you very much. So Will, can you go to the next slide? Okay, before I introduce myself and before Will introduces himself, I wanted to just take a minute to kind of say where we are right now, and to kind of soberly state that, in my opinion, we are failing very badly as a species to stop the irreversible degradation of the life support systems here on planet Earth. And also wanted to take a moment to say that it's after 15 or so years of being, 16 years of being a climate activist, this feeling of surreality of the knowledge, the scientific knowledge of how badly we're failing and how much we stand to lose, which is everything, commingled with the way that almost everything in our society is geared not only to ignore this planet-wide degradation, but to essentially actively accelerate it, as you can see in this plot. That sense of surreality has not gone away from me. And I often have to pinch myself as a climate scientist to kind of, go back to the science and remind myself that, yes, this is really happening. The science supports my my sense of terror, basically, at what's happening to this Earth system, because the norms all around us of people basically not acting, it's essentially the bystander effect. Our psychology is so strong to react to that sense of basically everything is normal, that it's a very strange psychological state to have the science, to fully accept how grave the implications of the science are, but to still have people walking around and buying things at malls and basically not acting, and have world leaders calling for the expansion of the fossil fuel industry, even now, on one hand, while they talk about existential crises and the fact that they listen to scientists on the other. So it's a very weird place to be. So anyway, this slide, I think you're probably familiar with it. It shows increasing atmospheric CO2 concentration, which is basically what's driving global heating, as I think probably you all know by now. And it's also showing the increasing temperatures and the color bars. And then it's showing all of the kind of attempts of the United Nations to try to stop this, and basically all the empty promises that have been made over the last 3 decades, culminating most recently in COP26, which in my opinion was a complete failure, although many people tried to spin it as a success, much to the peril of our species and all of life on Earth. Okay, next slide, Will. This is another view. So this is essentially the same thing, except this is showing the global emissions of CO2 from fossil fuels and land use change going up also exponentially. So the CO2 fraction in the atmosphere is going up exponentially, and our emissions are going up exponentially. We're now at well over 40 gigatons of CO2 being emitted per year. And it's not really stopping. There's some effort to spin kind of transitioning more from coal towards fossil gas. In my opinion, the leakage rates were underestimated. But essentially, until world leaders switch into what I call climate emergency mode and directly address the huge oil derrick in the room, which is that the fossil fuel industry has been lying for 3 decades and they're still expanding. And what we need, then that's the cause, that's the fundamental cause of global heating, which is leading to much of the, not all, but much of the degradation on planet Earth. So until we directly address that and come up with a plan for rapidly ramping it down on a schedule and have mechanisms for enforcing that schedule and reassessing it, we are cooked. Like, we need to have that level of accountability and direct addressing the cause. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is the last slide in the introductory section. So, you know, this is a very focused meeting where, you know, I'm not trying to convince you that this is, you know, the climate breakdown is real. I do just have some comments on, I guess, how serious it is from my perspective. But the purpose here is to get all of you to step up your action as climate activists. In my mind, this means taking more risks. If you're not taking risks as a climate activist, if you don't sometimes feel that the butterflies in your stomach, or that like you might be risking you know, your job, for example, or you might be risking arrest, or you might be risking many other things. There's all different levels of risk. But if you don't feel like you're taking any risk at all, you're probably not creating much social change. Because again, we're so attuned to, we're such social animals. And so when we step outside of norms and when we're pushing against kind of the accepted way of doing things, against the legal system, against social norms, against norms in our organizations, it feels a little bit scary. And the more you push, the scarier it feels. So, you know, we need to start taking risks. We definitely need to start recruiting more people. We're especially trying to get scientists to act in the actions that we'll talk about a little bit later, but everybody is welcome. We need everyone to join the movement and to push for change as quickly as possible in any way that they can. And again, like in my experience, it's all about going out of your comfort zone. And I'm trying to push myself even further out of my comfort zone through this action on April 6th that we're going to talk about. Okay, so Will, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Will. I'm calling from what is now known as Seattle. I just want to do land acknowledgement, like because that's important in our fight here in the U.S. Indigenous people have been taking care of the land. So I'll just say I'm here on land that continues to be inhabited and cared for by the Duwamish people who've lived on the shores of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. And I just wanted to do that as a precursor. So yeah, I am a scientist. I'm a scientist, researcher, engineer. I've been doing research at various institutions and in industry for a little over a decade. And I primarily have been doing material science research, specifically nanomaterials. And you know, as you know, it's always been a dream of mine to become a scientist, and I'm very grateful to be where I am today, doing the cool things that I get to do. And like right now, I'm currently I've gone back to grad school. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Washington, where I've been studying modeling techniques for looking at biomaterials. And that's what kind of the picture is down here of as kind of the research that I've been doing. And then in the past, I've done more like hands-on lab things, building materials for. So this is a carbon nanotube composite for power lines. So lots of really cool topics, and it's all very interesting. But and granted, I've always in 2008 when The Inconvenient Truth came out, like I remember sitting down with my family and watching it and feeling like, wow, like this is a really big deal. But all the messaging kind of around me since then, up until pretty recently, was basically that like, oh, like look at all this cool research that people are doing, like something's going to happen, like we're going to just find this magical cure. And I'm not a climate scientist, but I feel like I've seen a lot of these different projects that are like targeting like these miracle cures that people are kind of praying for. And I do hope that these things do end up working, but what's become very clear is the systemic level of this issue. So I included this picture over here. This is a project that I had the privilege of working on that's actually recently, that's actually carbon sequestration by growing seaweed. And like carbon sequestration, people talk about that as being like one of the things that we can do, like the drawdown of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to save the planet. But like being involved in that project, like we've modeled it, we've done kind of design for this thing, but like, and this is an industry, this is a company trying to make a product kind of, and because of that model, like there's the timelines for this are crazy, and it's just so strange that the value of drawdown and really fixing this problem are not kind of emphasized in our society. And so like I am a scientist, I do this research, but I've also been doing a lot of action. I've been doing organizing since 2019, specifically doing direct action, because it seems like a tactic that can be used to create the radical change that needs to happen. And so these other two pictures are pictures of some of the shenanigans that I've been up to, but to draw attention to the issues at hand. And like this is an action that I've did in Seattle, where we put on like doing dramatic performances to really put the crisis front and center in people's minds. This is a deployment of something that I did together with a great group of people in Boston. Yeah, so that's kind of where I am today, and I'm here as a part of Scientists Rebellion because this is kind of like, for me, this is the intersection of those two worlds and how like we can really use that as a good strategy. So yeah, I'll pass.
Okay, great. Thanks, Will. So I am a climate scientist based in Los Angeles. I don't usually give my affiliation when I do activism. It's part of the tightrope that I walk to try to, my day job is climate scientist. And then, my other day job, I guess, is, and my personal time is climate activist. I don't really understand how it's possible for climate scientists, for example, to be aware of the changes in the Earth system that are occurring so rapidly and to not speak out and to not be a climate activist and to not take risks. So that's just where I'm coming from. To me, this is not, being an advocate for the Earth and speaking out is not something that's optional for me. It's not something that I can just choose not to do. So of course, this image is a beautiful image of our beautiful planet. The little blue dot there that's being pointed to by the arrow as viewed from Saturn by a mission that our laboratory launched pretty long time ago. We were there on the lab looking up at the spacecrafts over at Saturn, and we waved to it when it took this picture. So I think that's super cool. But it's just coming from astrophysics. So my original kind of scientific endeavor was in astrophysics, searching for gravitational waves. I made the switch in 2012 into earth science because I was getting so terrified of climate breakdown. But I think I do have a little bit of an astrophysics perspective, and that for me translates into a sense of gratitude for all this planet is and how incredibly special it is in the cosmos, and how fragile it actually is, and how delicate the climate system is, and how, again, in the 4.5 billion years that this planet has been here, the changes that are occurring now are among the most rapid and the most dramatic and the most serious in terms of their implications for life on Earth. And I remember when I was making the switch, that was something that really struck me, is that we were having geologic scale changes happening within our lifetimes, within a matter of years, and just how wrong that feels to me. Like, as a mammal here, as a person on this planet who evolved with this planet, there's something deep inside me that longs for a sense of planetary stability. To know that the growing season next year is going to be the same as the growing season this year. To know that precipitation and rainfall is going to be happening within sort of normal regimes, and that the kind of the things that the Earth system variables that have led to our civilization will kind of be able to keep going, right? And that well, anyway, I think you get what I mean. So my dog is definitely wanting some attention right now. Okay, next slide. Mitzi, you are being a distraction. Okay, we wanted to just make some space and acknowledge that we're all feeling a lot of crazy emotions when it comes to climate and ecological breakdown. And there's no right or wrong emotions here on how to feel about what's happening. It is what it is. And it's important for us to accept our own emotions, and it's important for us to acknowledge and accept other people's emotions and that they might be different from ours. So I think I'm out of shock and denial. I do still see a lot of denial even among climate scientists, because you can accept the facts, but still not sort of emotionally accept what this means for our planet and for the ecosystems that we love and for the future, the collective future of humanity, for our kids, for example. It's easy to kind of, close the computer and then sort of forget about how scary this stuff is. So for me, like, letting it in emotionally was an important part of my own journey. And now I would say that I mostly feel grief. Sometimes I just get caught off guard by tears, because I feel how much we're losing. Sometimes I think about the sacrifices that my fellow activists are making, and how society sort of kicks them and mocks them almost, even though they're literally protecting the fucking planet. Yeah, sometimes when I think about, especially direct action activists, I get a little emotional, because I'm just so grateful to them. And I also feel tremendous anger at the inaction and the disinformation coming from the fossil fuel industry. And I'm really glad that relief is on this slide, because that's one of the things that keeps me going, is that I want to know, while I'm still on this planet, before I die, my deepest longing is to see humanity start doing the right thing, and to turn the corner on the destruction and the potential loss of so much that is good on this planet. So it's gonna be harrowing at this point. We've waited so long. The disinformation has been so fucking successful, that we're in pretty dire straits now, and it's going to be harrowing, even if we start doing the right thing starting now. But at the same time, as the heat waves keep getting worse and the flooding keeps getting worse and food insecurity gets worse, if we come together and realize that we have to, part of what the planet is telling us right now is that we have to help each other. If we don't, even if we reduce fossil fuels to zero, we're going to be facing agricultural losses and changes and water scarcity in many regions of the world. Parts of the global south near the equator might be too hot and humid for people to live in anymore. No matter what we do now, there's going to be a huge climate migration crisis that unfolds in coming decades. And even if we do everything right in terms of ending the fossil fuel industry now, there will still be huge losses, huge numbers of deaths. Who knows how many, what those are going to number, could be even up to billions. And if we don't come together also to help each other, it's going to just be harrowing. But if we do, the sense of solidarity, the sense of maturing as a species, of kind of coming out of this rocky adolescence, this nightmare of history that we've been in so far, will kind of make it all worth it. And that's the gift I want to give, to help give to my kids and to young people, to all the coral reefs and the forests and the non-humans on this planet, is to be part of that movement to help humanity turn that corner. Okay, next slide. Okay, so one of the main points scientifically I wanted to make in this talk is just to to say that if you take a globe and you spin it around and you stopped it and put your finger anywhere, whether it's ocean, whether it's ice, whether it's land, whether it's North America or Asia or Africa or Australia or Antarctica, no matter where your finger lands, there will be trends there, changes in the Earth system that are moving in one direction. Ice is melting. This is global land surface temperatures rising. There's, spring is coming earlier. Particular species, almost all of the species, marine, terrestrial, are moving closer to the poles, moving higher up mountains, desperately trying to maintain a livable temperature for themselves. No matter where you look in the Earth system, unless you're like maybe looking at like deep lava or something like that. But anywhere you look in the biosphere, for sure, the cryosphere, the ocean, there are rapid changes going in one direction, which are trends. They should all be flat. If we were living on a planet that was in balance, this plot would be flat. Next slide. This is ocean heat, increasing ocean heat. More than 90% of the excess energy that's coming into our planet because of all of the extra greenhouse gases that we put in the atmosphere, which absorb outgoing infrared radiation, right, and re-radiate it back down to the Earth. So that, normally in balance, a planet in balance, as much infrared radiation is emitted from the surface and from the atmosphere and streams into space as sunlight comes in, right? So that the net energy on any given day, on any given month, in any given year is almost identically zero. And then the planet stays in the same balance. It doesn't get hotter or colder. When more energy is coming in than can get out, the planet has no choice but to heat up. It has no choice. That's just physics. Once it gets to a hotter temperature, it'll, as black body, a black body gets hotter, radiates more energy. So eventually we'll come back into energy equilibrium, but the entire planet will be hotter. And over 90% of that excess heat is going into the oceans. This should be flat, right? And this is a trend. This should be, I wish the public would appreciate how terrifying this particular plot is. Okay, next slide. Here's another one. This should be flat. This is increasing atmospheric CO2 concentration. So we already showed you this plot in the first slide of this talk, along with kind of the milestones of inaction and empty promises from basically the United Nations. And I'm grateful that they're trying. We certainly need international cooperation. I mean, this is obviously a global problem, but the unwillingness to face directly the fossil fuel industry, I think, is really the big problem here. Okay, next slide. And just more examples of trends. Again, I think there's just hundreds and hundreds of these. You can slice it globally, like take the global mean of these kinds of trends, precipitation, heat waves, ice melting, or you can look at particular regions, which then the signal is much noisier, but even regionally now, a lot of these signals are getting extremely strong. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just a few more comments on kind of the nature of the emergency that I kind of would love it if every human on the planet who was like, high school age or older knew this stuff. So it definitely appears to be a global problem, like I said. I think the billionaires and a lot of the ultra rich and a lot of the people who are still in some level of denial about how serious this is, maybe feel like their region, like say they live in Canada or in Finland or something, that they might be more or less safe from global heating. I strongly disagree with that. I think the heat dome last summer kind of like hopefully started to bring people in the global north out of that misunderstanding. But heat dome in British Columbia that set off wildfires the very next day, flooding in New York City, people drowning in their basements. This is the very merest foothills of the crisis, again, because we've got all these trends, right? So it's not a new normal. Things will keep getting worse. Next slide. I don't think there's any place to run to. We're stuck on this planet. It's a beautiful planet, but we have to face this crisis. We can't run away from it anymore. So climate breakdown and extinction, it's effectively irreversible. So there's a lot of different impacts that are occurring. But a lot of the worst impacts, like just horrible humid heat waves that can be too much for the human body to deal with. When we end the fossil fuel industry completely and we stop emitting greenhouse gases and we stop cutting down the planet's forests and we, rethink agriculture so that it doesn't contribute nitrous oxide, et cetera. So when we come out of this emissions nightmare that we're in right now, however hot the planet gets, that's how hot it will stay for a very long time, unless we do something like stratospheric aerosol geoengineering and block some of the sunlight, which has its own very, very frightening implications. And then there's tipping points that they're looming out there in the future. We don't know exactly when they'll be crossed or if they've already been crossed. But we do know that every single day that we don't act, these things will get worse, right? And then a few other timescales. Sea level rise has a very, very, very long tail. No matter what we do now, the sea levels will continue to rise, because even if we stopped global heating cold turkey somehow magically right now at 1.2 degrees Celsius global average, we know that the ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica and the glaciers, they're melting right now. So if we stay at this current level of global heating for hundreds and hundreds of years, we're still going to continue losing that ice. So sea level rise will continue. And then biodiversity loss has the longest tail of all. We know from previous mass extinctions that it takes up to 10 million years for biodiversity to recover on this planet. Okay, next slide. I'm going to try to speed things up a little bit. So I just wanted to show this picture of deforestation in the Amazon. A lot of new research has been coming out recently about just how little time is potentially left to save the Amazon rainforest. It's being hit by global heating, which is increasing droughts, and it's also being hit by just getting cut down, mostly for the production of beef. Everyone freaks out about, like, oh, we can't ask people to make sacrifices. There's no place for beef eating on this planet anymore whatsoever. This forest, this beautiful, amazing place, probably unique in the entire universe, makes its own rain. It transpires so much water, but if it's too fractured and if the edges get chewed away too much so that there's not enough of the forest left, it can't keep creating its own rain. And then that, coupled with a hotter and hotter planet, it can reach a tipping point and transition into savanna. And I think it's quite possible that it's already gotten to the point that it can't be saved. I honestly don't. Unfortunately, I think in my lifetime, I will probably witness the complete loss of the Amazon. Next slide. All right. And the current extinction rate right now is 1,000 times the background. I mean, I don't know. I find it hard to put into words how fast this is all changing and how much we're losing. And yeah, I think it's maybe somewhat of an empathy problem too, that a lot of humans maybe don't. It seems like we have a really hard time empathizing with people that don't look like us, that have different skin colors maybe, and that, whose houses don't look like us, etc. And I think we also have a hard time empathizing with trees and with coral reefs and with orangutans and with the millions and millions of species that are suffering and dying right now and going extinct. I firmly believe that our legal system needs to grant legal personhood not to corporations, but to trees and rivers and lakes and non-human animals. All right, next slide. I put together this project, which is taking the IPCC kind of findings from the different working groups and kind of collating them on a decade by decade basis. So there's a URL down there. You can go to that. I put in the working group 1 findings. I still need to put in the working group 2 findings. But if under 2 different climate emission scenarios, if you want to know, like, if humanity does as best as we can, how bad things are going to be in 2040 or 2050, you can find that here. Or if humanity chooses a business as usual scenario where we keep emitting and emitting and we don't do the right thing, things will look, as far as the Earth system is concerned, they'll look pretty similar under both of those scenarios for the next 10 or 15 years, but then it starts to diverge radically. Okay, next slide. I'm going to try to finish this pretty quick. Yeah, I think I already went over this. Next slide, Will. Yeah, I wanted to point out that the social movement that we're part of is I think it's the first social movement, the first protest movement on the planet, which is driven by physics. I was desperately hoping that we could get the movement going, 16 years ago, just based on projections of how bad it was going to get in the near future, and that didn't happen. It's very hard to get people to sacrifice their time, their energy, take risks at their organizations, put their bodies on the line, go to protests, etc. It's very hard to get people to do that with something that's coming in the next 10 years, for example. Well, now we're here, we're feeling it. People are dying right now, especially in the global south, with developing famines and, again, flooding, heat waves, wildfires. So now the movement started to get legs because the catastrophes are here now, and they will get worse. And I try to urge political candidates to realize that. I think we might be on a social tipping point. I desperately hope we are, where it's not possible for climate deniers to get elected anymore. Okay, next slide. Again, because this will get worse and worse and worse. And yeah, this is kind of the crux of the problem, right? This is why the world leaders have been not acting. And even right now with Ukraine and the crisis and the oil and gas ban in the US, Biden's he's not calling really for a transition away from fossil fuels. He's calling for an expansion of domestic production. And he and Jen Psaki are bragging about increasing production, which is leading us deeper and deeper into the catastrophe, and which is making the fossil fuel executives very, very happy. All right, next slide. Okay, and that's pretty much it for me. So it took a little bit longer than I wanted to, but I'm really glad I had the chance to talk to you. I've got a lot of projects that I do in my day job. I just did a thread on them on Twitter. So I'm Climate Human on Twitter. So if you go and follow me there, you can get a sense of what the projects I'm working on. I just got selected for a really big grant on Thursday that I was desperately hoping to get. Some to me, it's the very core of what keeps me up at night on climate and ecological breakdown, which is just increasing humid heat, how that's going to play out in urban centers at very fine spatial resolution. So we're going to downscale the global climate model projections to under 1 kilometer is our goal. So it'll be genuinely neighborhood scale, and it will combine urban heat island effect with increasing global heat. So we'll get to see in all of the world's cities, including the global south, which neighborhoods are most at risk under different climate scenarios, and when things will really start to break down in those neighborhoods. And that, working with the Red Cross, which is a partner for this project, we can start to mitigate some of that coming humid heat catastrophe. So with that, thank you very much for listening. And I'm going to hand it over to Will, who's going to transition into talking about direct action.
Great, yeah, thanks, Peter. So I'll go breeze through some of these slides. There's like kind of the getting into the direct action piece, like none of this happens in a vacuum. There's a lot of pieces that are all interrelated that have led us to this point. And so that's something that we kind of need to think about when considering doing something like civil disobedience. And as was mentioned, COP, there's a pretty strong consensus that COP has failed and this is kind of like the business as usual projection of what is happening right now on a global scale to try to mitigate this crisis. So kind of want to pause for a breath, because there's a lot of emotions maybe being felt. I mean, I'm always I feel like the grief is kind of a continuous process. And sometimes it's easy to turn away from some things, but then things come up again. And yeah, and this is where, and I like this picture because it talks about tactics specifically. But before going further, there's a couple of people that have been pretty inspirational to me and to many others. And I'll just read one thing that seems pretty relevant right now, which is, life will cook, the seas will rise, the planet's lungs will be ripped out, and the law will let this happen because the harm was never imminent enough. Imminent at the speed of the people is too late. And I like all these quotes a lot, but specifically this one I wanted to mention because of its ties to direct action, and why, what is direct action and why we do direct action. So to kind of define, the Scientist Rebellion is a nonviolent network. So we engage in civil disobedience, nonviolent direct action, called NVDA. There's even like nonviolent civil resistance. Those are all the terms for the approach and tactics that we are using as an organization. And as I mentioned earlier, like all of this stuff, all of these problems are interconnected, and like these things don't happen in a vacuum. So we work on, like, we try to work on all pieces of the problem, but we really focus on the climate justice side of things. Pretty good definition of direct action comes from MLK, who used civil disobedience and nonviolent direct action as a tactic for, and so in his letter from Birmingham prison, he says, you may be asking, why direct action? Why the sit-ins, the marches? Isn't the best way the negotiation? Indeed, this is the goal of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create a crisis such that a community that has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the problem. It seeks to dramatize the conflict so much that it can no longer be ignored. And this is really relevant to everything that's being discussed, because we talk about these issues, and as soon as you stop talking about this stuff, it's so easy to just like disassociate it from it and think like, oh, this is happening in some other place. This doesn't affect me right now, and without even trying. There's no, like, not at fault of any of us for like doing that. So that's a reaction to hearing this kind of things. And direct action seeks to bring this to the center of the line, like bring a lot of attention to this, so that to cause the kind of change that needs to happen. And so getting into the details of this, like why specifically nonviolent direct action. So direct action is about pushing the rules or breaking the rules to raise awareness. And one of the things that comes up is that people are like, oh, why are you breaking the rules? Like they're there for a reason. Well, our governments and institutions have a contract to help us, and they are breaking that side of the contract clearly. And so that is kind of the one motivation. The other thing is the timelines of the things that need to change. Things need to happen very, very quickly. And nonviolent direct action has been shown to be a tactic that can be used to effectively change things. There's a research done by Erica Chenoweth, who wrote a paper called Why Civil Resistance Works. And this outlines what is called the 3.5% rule, which is that if 3.5% of population engage in continuous direct action, you are guaranteed to have societal or lasting system change. And I add in the 0.1% rule because there's two key words there. There's consistent, like targeted direct action, like that is important, and there's guaranteed change for 2.5%. And if it's even a smaller number than that, the 0.1% is saying that like even smaller numbers have been shown to be effective. And that's kind of the crux of the strategy. So yeah, I'd like to give one case study on this being used in the climate crisis, because like we're not like, this is not a novel concept. Using direct action for the climate crisis, it's been done by many people for a while. A recent example is the Line 3 fight. This Line 3 was a tar sands pipeline that was done by that was being upgraded or installed by the oil company Enbridge from Alberta to the United States. And it's fossil fuel expansion. That by itself means it shouldn't happen. There's a lot of other interconnected issues, like it was done without the permissions of the Anishinaabe people. It was going through their land. It had a bunch of river crossings that were very dangerous. And so like all of these issues made this a big issue. so the fight for this has been going on for a while. There's been a lot of permitting and legal like action and meetings to discuss like what policies should be put in place to stop this. But what really, like the Line 3 got a lot of attention, especially over the past 2 years, because there was targeted nonviolent direct action. There was a couple strategies. People were literally putting their bodies in front of construction to stop construction of this pipeline. This is images of 2 blockades that happened. There were also all around the country. There was direct action happening at banks, specifically Chase Bank, who's a major funder of fossil fuel, to get them to stop funding this pipeline. So we kind of see that tactic working on like getting this issue that was kind of not very well known to becoming like this thing that people are talking about. So what about us? What are we doing here? So we're Scientist Rebellion, and we're scientists gathered together, identify ourselves as wearing lab coats at actions, and we're, there's this common belief that nonviolent direct action is necessary is the necessary tactic to really create the change that we're talking about. So important question is like, why scientists? Well, there is a lot of privilege and power that comes with being a scientist. There's legitimacy that's given to science by like the fact that it is science, and like but also the institutions that give legitimacy to the actions of scientists. That's one small thing. But the other thing is that we have like the point of science and research is to inform the public, and it's part of our duty to do that. And the final kind of thing is that it's clear the science is clearly true, and it's clear that that we are headed for a catastrophe. Like this has been repeated many times. But if I'm in a burning building and I'm like reading my newspaper, and I look up and tell my roommate like, oh, the building's burning, and then I like turn back to my paper and keep reading. Like that's insane. That's insanity. Like that's not how you treat a crisis. Like you need to act with your actions and not just your words. And that's kind of the main idea here. So Scientist Rebellion has been around for a little over a year now. I think it started in 2020, but some history of what's happening is that a year ago there was the first Spring Rebellion, which was a little small, but it was 150 scientists in 10 countries. So that's actually pretty big compared to some of the other actions that we've talked about. And there was a lot of different things going on, paper wheat pasting, hunger strikes, educational disruptions, people like informing the public about what was going on. And that led to, that kind of got the name out. And then in this past summer, some scientists leaked the early version of the IPCC report. So one thing that is true about these reports is that they kind of get watered down a lot before they're released officially. And this is because of the fact that, there's a lot of reasons for this, but basically this like unfiltered report was kind of released, and that actually got a lot of media attention around the world because it had a lot of very poignant details. So kind of following this, leading into the fall, there was a big action at COP26. There were a couple of different actions, but one of the big ones was that there was actually a large first ever mass arrest of scientists, specifically caused by physics. There were 21 scientists who blockaded a bridge to draw attention to what was going on, and then they were arrested, and then the next day they actually gave a teach-in as exactly why they did that, exactly why they were causing disruption. And there were several other actions that happened, but this really actually got the attention of, also got a lot of attention. There was a release in Nature, and actually this is one of the scientists who was part of this action had previously written about an actual journal paper about how civil disobedience is necessary for action. So it's kind of cool. so that's kind of the history of the organization. But what do we have? What are we doing now? Well, so we are planning for the April rebellion, and we have grown by an order of magnitude from last year. And I think these numbers are actually just keep going up, and we're hoping to increase those numbers even more today. So we actually, I think the slide was made, there's actually up to 25 countries around the world participating in this Spring Rebellion. And there's more than 1,000 scientists. And we have representation from all around the world. And I think this is really important because mentioning like the disproportionate effects of climate on the global north, global south, and kind of the privilege of that, like we actually have a lot of connections with countries all around the world, and it's kind of an equal spread between the global north and global south. But I'm here in the US, and we have a couple of big actions happening. There's two big actions planned in Los Angeles and Washington, DC. And we'd really like to get people to show up, to sign up and show up to those actions. And there's a couple other actions happening. There's an action being planned in the Pacific Northwest. There's one in Boston, and then there's a couple other groups that are trying to plan things as well. So yeah, and the timeline for that is that on April 4th, the third group report from the IPCC report will be released. And that's April 4th to April 9th is when the kind of actions will take place for Scientist Rebellion. And strikes and occupations will begin at universities. And then there's a high level action on April 6th. And when I say high level, I mean that the LA and DC actions are actually taking place on the 6th. And we really encourage people to participate in that. So those are higher level direct action where people will be risking arrest, and with messaging about like why we need to start taking this seriously. And following that, the kind of weekend after, there's a bigger but like non-violent direct action, but a little bit lower risk, mix of things happening. People doing teach-ins, people pasting scientific papers and blocking, causing disruptions in other ways. And the idea is that like we get as many people as we can to this Wednesday action and to participate, and then hopefully we get even more people following up. And this is kind of the spark to start this big mobilization. So I've gone over a little bit, but I'll just go through this really fast. Big picture, our strategy is to normalize the civil disobedience as a tactic that is legitimized by scientific institutions, and to start this revolutionary changes that need to happen to avoid an unlivable planet. And I'll kind of end there. I think I'll just end there. This is the getting some information about us, and I think Nate and some others will post things.
Yeah. Thank you, Will. This is Peter again. I just wanted to say very clearly that I am completely willing to risk arrest on April 6th, and that I hope as many scientists and even non-scientists join in that global event. I just the hour is so late, and it's time, again, like I said in the beginning, it's time for us to start taking more risks.
Yeah.
Nate,
Yeah,
do you want to do a little Q&A or?
Yeah. Thank you both so much for giving that talk. I mean, it's always really great to hear the science again, and constantly remind ourselves what we're facing and what we need to do to face this really awful crisis.